Okay, it's 5:03, and I'll call the meeting to order. It's good to see everyone here today. Again, what a beautiful day it is in Stony Plain. I just asked members of council, our residents, and our staff just to take some time and give some thought to what's happening overseas. A lot of geopolitical tensions and problems with the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. There are civilian lives that are lost, and there are other lives. So we're just hoping that for a speedy end and resolution to the conflict that's happening overseas. Members of council, there's an agenda before you. Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council adopt the February 28, 2022 regular council meeting agenda as presented.
Okay. Administration, anything to add?
Good evening, Your Worship. No, nothing from administration.
Okay. Thank you. Now I'll call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Hansard?
Yes, my answer is yes. I had myself muted.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to number 3 is a public input session. This is the time that we allow residents to address council on anything that's not on the current agenda. Administration, has anybody registered?
Good evening, Your Worship, and all of council. Yes, we have had an individual pre-register for this evening. Mr. Luke Adam is with us this evening.
Okay. Welcome to council chambers, Ms. Adams. Please come to the front. Again, the mics might be a little touchy, so if you can just pull directly into your face there and speak clearly into it. And then you have about 10 minutes to make a presentation, and then council gets the chance to ask questions of clarity and understanding.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors, and town administration for the time to speak today. My goal is to quickly share with you a bit about our farm, where we are going, where we see potential barriers for us and farmers like us, how we would like to continue partnering with the town, and to boldly ask council to keep those of us in mind as you continue with strategic planning in the future. My name's Luke Adam, and today I'm joined by my wife, Danny, my son, Walker, and my grandma, Ruth Adam. I'm a 4th-generation farmer, along with my wife and 3 kids. Our family farm's located on the furthest northwest property within the town of Stony Plain. So for context, if you are on the 5th meridian and you are on the overpass, if you look to the west, you'll see our 2 silos sitting on the horizon. That's us. Our family farm was homesteaded in 1899 and has been in our family ever since 123 years. We're proud and supportive citizens of Stony Plain, partnering in its growth and development through various activities such as serving on the Chamber of Commerce as directors and chairs, serving on agricultural planning committees, participating in farmers' days, tractor pulls, parades. We're active in 4-H, both as members and buyers. We've had 3 congregational chairmen serve within our local churches. I currently ref basketball at a local school, and I'm the head coach of Walker's hockey team. And my grandpa, John Adam, even won the Citizen of the Year award. Our past is here in Stony Plain, our present is here in Stony Plain, and we believe our future is here in Stony Plain. Therefore, in 2015, my wife and I moved back to the farm to partner with my parents and work through transitioning the farm business from my mom and dad to myself and my wife. There's 3 areas of transitioning a farm business. You have a personal, a business, and an estate. And all of these support one another. And our goal for one another was to support mom and dad so that they could age in place while we could take over the business. Each of those aspects of planning supports this. And part of that was to subdivide mom and dad's current house off of our current quarter section and 3 to 5 acres for them to live on and provide them security from us and the farm business. So if Danny and I screw it up, they don't lose their house and home, right? But also provide them with the financial security that should they require more assistance in town later in their life, that they have the available assets to do that through sale. Therefore, I was encouraged when reading up on the town's land use plan, which was supported by the literature of the Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board, that one of the goals was to preserve the fragmentation of prime farmland. However, I was a little concerned that I was looking at it from one side of the coin, where we were preserving farmland for farmland and not for the future development of houses. Now, with that, I asked for the town to have a pre-application meeting. So at this time, I'd just like to make it very clear that I'm not under any formal application with the town at this time. I had simply asked for some information on if our plan would be supported moving forward. And in early April 2021, I met with Chelsea Rudolph and Miles Dibble with the town planning department. They were extremely helpful and knowledgeable during that meeting, and I left with a much greater understanding of the structure in place that they're required to work with, as well as an empathy for them as they try to balance the goals of council, town, our residents, and developers. It was also during that meeting that I found out that our current land use bylaw does not allow for subdivisions less than 8 hectares or 20 acres of land off of future development zones, which we are currently under. At the end of April 21, we put pause on our plans to move forward on this as we found out my dad, Brian, had terminal cancer, which obviously stalled the process, but highlighted the importance of this and going forward with it, and to take care of my parents to allow them to age in place as long as possible. Currently, Dad's still at home. He's receiving health care every day, and it is his intention and our intention to keep him there as long as possible. So why am I here in front of you? I'm here to ask boldly that in future strategic planning sessions that council consider how we as a town work with our pioneering and agricultural families as they try to continue to live, prosper, and support our growing town. On February 7th, I attended the governance and planning meeting and was encouraged by the presentations of the EMRB and Edmonton Global, as they both highlighted agriculture as one of the largest and most important contributors to our regional and provincial economies. I was also proud of our council during the question periods, as there was clear evidence of trying to balance growth and development with a strong conviction that this is Stony Plain, and we're proud to be unique. Oh, and by the way, we need bungalows so our elderly can age in place. I couldn't agree more. Our town has a rich and proud history. We are unique. We look after our urban and our rural citizens. And that's why I'd like to propose that how we treat urban and subdivision and rural subdivision should be different. It is a unique situation. We pay our taxes on the farm, understanding that we're currently on our own for water, sewer, and other amenities. And we also understand that one day those amenities will come to our door and we will be called on to support them. And we are okay with that. But in the meantime, however, I'd ask that council support us by removing barriers to allow our parents to age in place as long as possible. Allowing a smaller subdivision provides another taxable property for our town. Few 70-year-olds want 20 acres of land to take care of, and they definitely don't want to pay tax on land that they're not presently using. Subdividing more than 5 acres of land for an acreage off of a usable quarter section of farmland doesn't help a farm business. And lending institutions don't value the full 20 acres anyways when you go to try to sell it. So you're putting our parent at a great disadvantage to who they can sell to at that time. And it creates the barrier for achieving the goal of allowing our younger generations to take care of our older generations. We were blessed to have Grandma live on our farm until 2021, at which point she decided to move into the new 3 Robbins building above the new library. Her presence on the farm provided us with 4 generations on the farm. It provided my wife and I mentorship. It provided value for Grandma to be included in the day-to-day. It provided opportunities for daily in-person check-ins with smiles and hugs and coffee at 3, and a connection for Grandma to the land that she lived and worked on for 65 years. We want this opportunity for our family moving forward, and we want this opportunity for other farming families in our town moving forward. So I'd like to thank you for your time, Mr. Mayor and councillors and town administration. I appreciate the work you're doing, trying to balance all the needs of our town and our residents, and I'd be happy to answer any questions should you feel appropriate.
Thank you for your presentation and bringing this conversation to the table with council. As you mentioned, you were here for the February 7th GMP, so you actually heard some of the commentary about land use planning and what we're trying to do, trying to balance the needs of growth and also maintaining as much agriculture as we can. And I'm not saying that agricultural land will never ever be developed, but we're trying to prolong that as long as we can to make sure that we grow up in a reasonable way versus going out as faster. Just one question before I turn it over to members of council if they have questions to ask. How large of a plot are you looking to subdivide out for your mom and dad?
About 3 to 5 acres.
3 to 5.
Yeah.
Okay. So within 3 to 5, is that large enough to sustain a septic field, a well, or whatever else that needs to have that one piece of property be self-sufficient?
Yes. Yeah, we would have to redo our septic currently.
Okay. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation this evening. It's more a question actually to our administration. So as we heard, the proposed subdivision of this is not in line with our current land use planning. Through the Subdivision Development and Appeal Board, is that something that can be brought forward through that channel? So if the application is made, essentially it would be declined because it would not meet the current land use bylaws. Would the applicant then have the opportunity to bring that forward under a subdivision development appeal?
Your Worship, through you to Council Laurie. So basically, I would have to review that to find out. It sounds like it would be a logical sequence of events, but I'd have to review that with planning staff to determine in this case what the regulations are and then reasons why it would be declined. And but you're right, subdivisions that are refused can be appealed.
Thank you. So I just wanted to make sure we had clarity on process so that, like I said, you know all the avenues open to you should you move forward and come up to some challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of clarity and understanding from members of council? Councilor Mayor, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Just for clarity, towards the end of your presentation, you were discussing how the limiting of, I didn't quite follow the limiting ability that you, in terms of the size of a subdivision, you were saying your folks would be disadvantaged if they were looking to sell. Could you explain that again for me?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Meyer. So lending institutions will not value over a certain amount of the property. So usually it's a house and a certain amount of acreage involved as well. So it would be reasonable to think that after 5 or 10 acres, then they don't value the additional if it's deemed farmland. So typically on a quarter section, it would be 10 acres, is my understanding. And then after that, you have to come up with the capital to borrow the rest. So if the property was valued at $750,000, but the house and a couple acres is $450,000, you can't get financing for the $300,000. So it would make it very difficult for somebody to come in and buy their property unless they already had that amount of capital or were a developer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hansard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, first of all, what a wonderful story to hear in council chambers. I only wish I was there so I could look out and see your mom and family sitting in council chambers with you. I'd like to ask a question about when you're talking about the current subdivision rules that we have in place with the town of Stony Plain, want you to subdivide a minimum of 20 acres. But is one of your thoughts that 20 acres taken off of the bigger farm piece actually detrimental because it reduces that land's availability to actually be used for farming and to continue to be used for farming when it really serves no purpose to your mom or to any future owner of that 5-acre parcel? Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, for Councillor Hansard. Councillor Hansard, yeah, so currently about out of the 3 to 5 acres, most of that would be pasture. Currently, we do not have any livestock. We would rent it out to a neighbor of type, so about anywhere from 10 to 15 acres of that land would be farmable land. So for us, yeah, it directly takes out land that would be productive to help our farm business.
Okay. And just as a piece of information for the rest of council, Mr. Mayor, I'm working with a real estate client right now on a larger, it's a hobby farm, nothing as big as Mr. Adams' property, but the banks, the lenders will not loan on more than 5 acres. They don't consider the land anything that they will finance if it's a residential property, and I believe that I'm hearing that's what they want to do. It's a double-edged sword. Forcing, I guess, the subdivision to be 20 acres is hurting the big farm as well as hurting the person who's going to have the sub acres. And with all respect, I don't think 750,000 is the value that would go on that property right now. I've not been in your parents' home, but I wouldn't think it would be that much, Mr. Adam. It's interesting that this comes up because I know there have been other families, even up Glory Hills Road, who have come to us in years past about being able to subdivide or set up accommodation for elders. So I'm very glad to hear that brought up again this term for our council to consider and to give us an opportunity to be respectful of what has gone on in that land as this family has continued to be outstanding stewards of the land for so many years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Hansard. Okay, just another question. In terms of the quarter section that you currently own, has it already been subdivided?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there was just over 2 acres subdivided for a family back in early 80s, I think, somewhere, maybe late 70s. Yeah, so currently we have 157 acres and change. Yeah.
Okay. Any other subdivisions on that quarter section?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Sounds good. To administration, based on our current land use bylaws, we will be reviewing them. Obviously, in the 80s, there was a parcel taken out about 2 to 3 acres. What is the current regulations right now?
Your worship, the current regulation is you're allowed 1 additional dwelling unit per subdivision, per lot. So typically, the administration has been allowing 1 subdivision out of the original quarter section as to achieve some of the things that the resident is talking about here. So I guess the regulation does not intend to have more than 1 at this time. And the minimum size is 8 hectares. There is a requirement to do an ASP, which basically, if you're going to develop a quarter section, we require an ASP. But in this case, when there is only 1 single lot coming out, we typically do not require that requirement because it, does not seem applicable. But multiple lots coming out of a quarter section does start to become problematic from a long-term planning perspective.
Okay. Thank you. And that was my second question was typically you said that we allow 1 subdivision out of this for like a homestead or for parents or for in-laws, etc. Can you provide some of the rationale behind why the Town of Smithton only allows 1 subdivision for a residential dwelling?
Your worship, it is fairly common in the rural municipalities to allow sometimes up to 4 per quarter section. I'm not sure what Parkland County's regulations are, but I do know in many municipalities in the Edmonton region, they allow a certain number, limited number of additional subdivisions per quarter section. The town has allowed 1. I'd have to do some research and get back to you on the history behind the 1, but I would assume it's to prevent fragmentation and limit future development opportunities because once the subdivisions are there, they're hard to work around, et cetera, in the long term with more and more aggressive infill and density coming later.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And again, there is different options. As you said, you do not have currently an application right now to subdivide, but there is. You can participate in the public hearing when we do our land use bylaw. Definitely your quarter section is under the future development zoning, which means probably next 30 to 50 years before we actually develop up there, right? So then you can maybe speak towards that in terms of what you said today, for something for us to consider as a council. And then as things go, if those regulations do not change, land use stays the same, as Councilor Lori asked, you can actually apply and you can be turned down, then you can also appeal to the subdivision appeal board as well. So those are your couple options going forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you much, and I appreciate you taking the opportunity to participate in the agriculture master plan in town Stony Plain.
Yep, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Administration, has anyone else registered to speak in public input session?
Mr. Mayor, we do not have any other registrations this evening.
Thank you. Does anybody in the gallery like to speak for a public input session? Okay, moving on to number 4. Thank you very much. To presentations and delegations. Today we have 2 under this agenda item. First is the swearing of a new deputy mayor. Let me go back to that. Where am I? All right. A motion, Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Town Council appoint Councillor Harold Palechko as Deputy Chief Elected Official for the term of February 28, 2022 to June 30th, 2022, or until the appointment of the next Deputy Chief Elected Official.
Thank you very much. Any debate on the motion? No. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Hassard?
I vote yes.
Okay, and that is passed. Councillor Palechko, can you join me?
Swear that I will diligently, faithfully, to the best of my ability, execute according to law, the office of deputy mayor, for the town of Stony Plain, in the province of Alberta. So help me God.
Thank you, Councillor Meyer, for your work the last 4 months. As those that are watching or part of the gallery that doesn't understand this process, we rotate the deputy mayor position for 4 months at a time. So each councillor gets 2 stints to be the deputy mayor. And the deputy mayor's role is to step in for me when I'm not able to attend meetings and also assist me in other endeavors and other kind of secret meetings, right? No, just kidding. But no, definitely the job is to make sure that there's somebody here that's a chief elected official, just in case I'm not available. So thank you very much for your time, Councillor Meyer, and welcome to being Deputy Mayor, Councillor Palechko. Moving on to 4.2, we have a presentation from the TLC for the 2021 operations. Administration, go ahead.
Your Worship, members of Council. So this evening, Lenny Richer, the General Manager of the TLC, and also the Board Chair, Jerry, why am I forgetting his last name, George, is here this evening to present the deficit position that the TLC unfortunately arrived at in 2021 operations. So Lenny has a quick PowerPoint. He'll be able to answer questions at the end of the PowerPoint, and Mr. George is also available for questions for Council too. Later in the agenda, we do have the business item, which will speak to the motion that we're recommending for this particular item. So that will be captured later in the agenda.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Risher and Mr. George. Welcome to Council Chambers.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. Thank you for allowing us time on the agenda this evening to speak to you on the 2021 operational deficit at the TLC and seek approval for the proposed funding strategy to cover this deficit. As Mr. Hill mentioned, I am joined by Board Chair and Town of Stony Plain Public Member, Mr. Jerry George. At the conclusion of the presentation, Mr. George or myself would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I'm just going to share my screen now. So 2021 certainly was another challenging year for everybody, as we well know, and the TLC was no different. While it certainly was a much more productive year and successful year than 2020, and there was initially a sense of great optimism heading into the year, significant challenges did emerge over the course of the year. The TLC was closed for a total of 10 weeks in 2021. This, of course, had impacts on our revenues, particularly in membership and drop-in revenues, but also facility rentals and tenant rent. In addition, provincial restrictions such as masking, capacity limits, as well as the implementation of the restrictions exemption program also impacted facility operations. Departments reduced expenditures during these closed periods, as well as slower times, particularly in staffing, as well as in our materials and supplies budgets wherever possible. The Restrictions Exemption Program, or REP, required significant staffing increases to screen patrons in, which I'll speak to a little bit later in the presentation. Additionally, the REP did have an initial impact on our revenues from a membership perspective, with approximately 400 members, or about 10% of what the current membership was at that time, either putting their membership on hold or canceling altogether due to the REP. Administration did work diligently to reduce expenses in other areas to make up for these decrease in revenues. First and foremost, with regards to our collective agreement, we did approach a union and asked them to open up the collective agreement, which spoke to a cost of living increase of 2.5% in 2021, asking them to take 0 in 21, which they voted in favor of, and so that was implemented across the board with all of our staff. Staffing levels were reduced during closures and based on activity levels, so as the capacities fluctuated, we reduced staffing wherever possible. We did continue with our reduced facility hours, so we're currently open an hour later in the morning and an hour earlier in the evening than has typically been expected over the course of the life of the TLC. Our materials and supplies budgets were reduced significantly. Training and travel budgets were frozen. And we saw also a reduction in our contracted services, our two biggest ones being security and custodial, wherever possible. At the end of the day, revenues ended up being 67.8% of budget, and our expenses, even though we did our best to contain the costs, ended up at 72.7% of budget. We came before you, or I guess before the previous council, I should say, in July of last year to provide a mid-year update given the ongoing challenges with COVID-19. Initially, at that time, we had shared that the anticipated deficit was about $145,000, but given the province's lifting of all restrictions that summer, there was optimism that the deficit could be reduced potentially. However, that was not the case, and the aforementioned changes to restrictions, including the REP, came into being. In addition to the impacts of the REP to the revenue side of things, it also directly impacted our expenses, as we had an unexpected increase for the need of staffing, as I mentioned before. Additionally, there was also an unexpected decrease in our facility or in our field rentals, both in terms of our regular field users as well as special events. At the end of the day, at the end of last year, after the audit's been completed, the final deficit of the year was $352,191. The memorandum of agreement between the TLC Board of Directors and the three owners clearly identifies that there are currently two reserves allowed. One is an operations reserve, which is used to help fund any future deficit, is more of a cash flow or a flowing in and out reserve. And then there's a capital reserve, which of course is intended to offset future capital or infrastructure purchases. At the end of 2021, there was 98,471 remaining in the operations reserve and $839,875 in the capital reserve, of which $364,875 had been committed previously to the 2022 budget that was presented to councils as part of that process. In addition, there's approximately just over $113,000 in deferred revenue from past projects over the number of years that have either come in under budget or the scope had slightly changed, and so there was that remaining dollar value sitting there. So we've got two options that we're proposing for council to consider, which were taken to the board of directors as well. Option one is to fully fund the deficit within our current reserves and access and internal dollars. And that would be utilizing the entirety of the operations reserve at $98,471, the entirety of the deferred revenue of $113,147, and the remaining coming from the capital reserve, which is $140,573, which would leave us with $334,000 in change remaining for future use. The pro and the benefit to this side is that there's no additional need for financial support from the municipalities, so we're not coming asking new monies to be allocated to us. On the flip side, of course, the drawback is that our operations reserve would be reduced to zero, and the deferred revenue and capital reserve would be reduced for future use as well. Option two, and really the only other option available at this point in time, would be an increased contribution from the municipalities, asking for the full amount to be funded in additional ask from the three owners. The pro to that, of course, the reserves and deferred revenue remain intact for future use, and the drawback being that additional and unexpected financial burden on the municipalities. So again, to summarize, there's the two options that were before you and for consideration. TLC administration took to the board of directors recommendation of option number one, to fund the deficit internally by using all of the available reserves, and that was approved by the board of directors. That concludes my presentation, and Mr. George and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation and taking your time to join us on council tonight. Members of council, any questions for clarity and understanding? Councilor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Risha, for the presentation this evening. Just in regards to, it's page 14 of our package, it's the impacts on the TLC operational budget, and the provincial restrictions and implementation of restrictions exemption program. On member retention, you said 400 members canceled upon implementation. What is that in terms of a percentage of membership? So how many members did the TLC have at the time that we lost 400 members?
At that time, there was approximately 3,800, so we're talking kind of in that 8 to 10% range. Historical numbers of membership is kind of that 5,000 to 5,500, but at that point in time, we were at about 3,800.
Right, so safe to say we were already suffering due to the pandemic, and then the implementation of the restrictions exemption program cut that even harder.
That's correct, and in all full disclosure, we are seeing a return of members, which is great news. But like I said, painting the picture back in time, that's where we were at that point when the decision was made to implement the restrictions exemption program, which by far was the best option of the two that were available to us.
Excellent, thank you. And then if I may, Your Worship?
Go ahead.
Just again, more so for clarity, being that we're in a public meeting and there's always lots of advertisement out there about all the various programs from the government that existed to help support different facilities that are out there. One of the biggest differences between the Tri-Leisure and being a Part 9 corporation owned by municipalities versus a private recreation center. Can you confirm that the TLC then was not eligible for any programs including the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, the Canadian Emergency Rent Subsidy, and the Hardest Hit Industries I can't remember the final acronym on it. The HHRP, I believe, is the acronym on it, the newest program they've put out?
Your Worship, through to Councilor Laurie and the rest of the council, the only one that we were eligible for was the rent subsidy. And so we did access that, which then flipped over to being the tenants applying. So initially it was the owner or the landlord applying for on behalf of the tenants. And then partway through they flipped it over and the tenants applied. And so we accessed all of that they could, and certainly all of our tenants turned over the entirety of what the rent subsidy that they received. And so, we did try to maximize as much rent and, and trying to keep them open as well.
Excellent, thank you. And I just want to give kudos to yourself and your staff for the service levels that were retained during the difficulty in operating and having to have your staff levels reduced. I know it must have been difficult, but I'd like to say the experience at the TLC throughout the entire time did not change. It was still a fantastic building to be in, and the service was excellent. So thank you very much for all your hard work on that.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Laurie. Councilor Loynes, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question in regards to the government handing out the childcare benefits and the preschool program that is offered through the Tri-Leisure, and I know that the cost of the program is going to be lowered. How is that going to affect what you're projecting here for any type of refund to those parents, and how does it affect your guys' budget for deficit then?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Loynes and the rest of the council, there will be zero impact because any of those reductions will be directly compensated by the government of Alberta. So the amount that we have to reduce our costs to parents will be subsidized by the government, and then any future or any further subsidy that they're eligible for will also come to us from the government of Alberta.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from Councilor Anderson? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. This question may have been answered back in July, but I wasn't on council, so I'm going to throw it out there and hopefully gain some clarity. Our 2022 corporate plan had an operational increase request from the Tri-Leisure in the amount of just over $40,000, and it was my understanding that that was to offset the initial deficit projection of $145,000. From July 2021 that you had mentioned tonight. But the requested transfers from your operating reserves, capital reserves, deferred revenue, total the amount that you've suggested is the final deficit. So I guess my question is, does this negate the need for that original ask of $40,000, or is this in addition to that ask from July?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Anderson and the rest of the council, the request for additional funding in the operating was strictly for the 2022 budget. It had zero, impact on our 2021 budget. It was just based on increased costs and a need for some bridge funding from the municipalities. So it was not intended to pay back any deficit or projected deficit.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Questions for clarity? Okay. Question for the general manager. Just kind of asking about the capital reserve that would be left remaining if all three councils choose option one of $334,000. Over the last couple of years, we've had some huge replacement costs at the TLC. I think the most recent one is the $1 million and change for the air handling unit. Does the TLC perceive any other large capital replacements in the near future?
Worship, to yourself and the rest of the council, certainly our 10-year capital plan does have a lot of bigger ticket items coming up over the next 5 to 10 years because of the age of the facility and expiring assets. I know we've been working with the general managers to share that information, and I know that they've been preparing. So certainly any amount that's left in the capital reserve would be able to go towards those in future years. But even at its peak of about $900,000, there still would have been a significant amount in future years that is going to be required from all three municipalities.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Hansard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome to Council Chambers, TLC. We're happy to have you here. I wanted to simply clarify, is it at one time in the past the three municipalities that own the TLC through the Part 9 company set up a system where the bulk of the reserves for repairs, etc., to the facility were actually held by the municipalities, not by the TLC? Is that still in effect, so that when you're talking about the reserves that you hold, this is only a very small portion of the monies that are available for ongoing repairs and upgrades? Is that correct?
Councilor Hansard, the municipalities never created a reserve for the TLC?
No, we didn't create it. I thought we were holding it, Mr. Mayor.
No, there's no reserve in Town of Stony Plain for the TLC.
Okay, if Mr. Ricker could respond to that, I thought I saw him nod. Maybe he had something else to clarify for me.
Your worship, through you to Councillor Hansard, rest of council. Of course, I've only been at the TLC for just over 3 years, but my understanding is when the TLC was first constructed, the municipalities each contributed a set amount with the intention that the TLC board would look after reserve capital replacement. That changed a number of years into operation, and now it's on a request basis. So that was I guess the impetus for developing the 10-year capital plan, long-term capital plan for the TLC, to then share with each of the municipalities what assets were going to be expiring, where the needs were going to be. And we come on an annual basis for the request on both the capital and infrastructure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the clarity from both your answer and Mr. Ricker's answer, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Hansard. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. This is probably through to administration a little bit for clarification. The final deficit is $352,000 for argument's sake. Of that, what portion of that belongs to the town of Stony Plain? And second part of that question would be, if we were not to use this, because I understand there's a number of projects coming forward in the next 5 years, we're still going to need to find this money somewhere along the way. How does that affect our budget today?
Good.
Your worship, through to, excuse me, Councillor Pletchko. Currently, we don't have a percentage share of this because we're using their own reserves. But if this was to be split under the percentage share that the agreement identifies currently, and this is not using the new census numbers, we have to recalculate that for 2023's upcoming budget. We're about 25% of the total. 25.45% would be Parkland County, and 49.54% is the city of Spruce Grove. So that's our allocation for 2022 and previous to that. Once we get into the new census numbers, there will be a slight adjustment to those percentages, and we'll ensure that we reflect those in the fall when the TLC comes forward with their 2023 budget request. Secondly, your second question, I believe, was how does this affect us long-term moving forward? There's a couple comments that I'll provide with that. One, it either slows down the TLC's capital requests to each of our municipalities, or it increases the level that we may have to support some of those priority infrastructure items moving forward. But certainly the 3 municipalities have the opportunity when the budget is presented to them to ask the appropriate questions to the TLC and then decide on their level of support at that time. Certainly administration works hard with the TLC administration to make sure that what does come forward is something that reflects their needs and also the current needs that each of our municipalities have related to our own infrastructure and capital items. Another option could be the TLC has some really good years coming forward and they result in a few surpluses which might replenish that $350,000 also. So those are a couple comments that I would put on the floor from a perspective for contemplation.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship, and sort of along the same lines as the Deputy Mayor and his concerns for future costs. Just in the report, and sorry, this is directed to you, Mr. Richer. One of the steps to reduce costs was to get staff to agree to a 0% COLA increase. Is that like an annual thing? And would we be expecting it to go up significantly in future years?
Your Worship, through you to Mr. Councillor Meyer and the rest of council, as per the current collective agreement, staff were, I guess, entitled to a 2.5% or due a 2.5% in 2021 and a 2.75 in 2022. And what we did by asking them to take 0, we pushed that out a year And so this current year right now, they're receiving 2.5% and then 2.75%. And that would be the end of the collective agreement, and we'd be back into negotiations. So we'd be looking at, I guess, staffing increases at that point. And so that'd be part of our negotiations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments for clarity? I have a question. You guys provided two options, option 1 and option 2. Was there a consideration for an option 3?
Your worship, through you to yourself and members of council, the only other option potentially would have been a hybrid of funding, maybe half and half. But at the end of the day, as per the MOA, any deficit is required to be funded by the municipalities, and so we felt it prudent just to bring one or the other. We felt it was an opportunity to utilize the reserves that we have, so we're not impacting municipalities further currently. As Mr. Hill suggested, we're hoping for better days ahead and start to replenish over time and see kind of the first 20 years slowly built up these reserves, and hopefully, you know, as things return to more normal state, the hope is that we would see that return of revenue back to the days that it was previously. So that's the reason why we only brought the two options.
Okay, and I appreciate that comment. And I asked that comment is because I understand that the TLC has two reserves, one for an operating reserve and one for capital. And I can foresee any operational surpluses going to the reserve of operations to offset years like this. But the capital, I see, has been built in there to replace the hard assets we have in the facility. So an option for me would be to use the operating reserve as it's designed to offset the deficit for 2021, but keep the capital reserve whole because we still need to replace capital within the TLC and have the municipalities fund the $140,000 out of this current budget. Was there any thought about that? Because then that uses the reserves as it's supposed to be. A capital reserve is for capital reserve, and as you mentioned, the TLC is getting older and there's more projects coming. So in the long run, the councils have to raise taxes anyways to cover this. But the operating reserve is the reserve that is created from surpluses and overages over the years that the TLC has been operational. So it kind of makes sense to have that hybrid. I'm just wondering if the board had that conversation, and that's why I asked you, why wasn't that third option presented?
Your worship, through you to members of council, any surplus in any given year is actually split out. So it's not all, even though it's an operational surplus, it doesn't all remain in the operating reserve. It's split 50-50. And so that capital reserve isn't necessarily been from capital items in the past. It's been 50% of the operating reserve going forward. The thought process and the recommendation to our board around fully funding it from reserves is, at the end of the day, the entirety of our reserves, in essence, is municipal money. Because it was overages at the end of the year. And so whether we ask for new money now and keep this existing money for later, or use what we currently have, hope for better days ahead, and then come forward with our ask at that point in time, was the approach that we decided to bring forward to the board. And so, you know, there was some discussion about those options for sure. We felt it was just most prudent to use the reserves that we have now, not impact the, you know, in an unexpected ask when budgets have already been approved in 2022, and then ask, you know, and plan, and as Mr. Hill suggested, there might be an opportunity to push back some of the capital items out an additional year to bridge that gap. So we felt it was the most prudent approach, and should council see fit to fund it in another way, certainly we'd be happy to share that with our board.
Okay. Thank you, and I appreciate those comments and understand kind of the reasoning that you're recommending option 1 coming to all 3 councils. Then my question, or maybe my ask to you and the chair is, can we get a mid-year update? As you mentioned that you don't have nothing, you know, unexpected as council and administration goes forward to plan 2023's corporate plan. So if I can ask that of the board, and yourself, Mr. Ritchie, to come do a mid-year presentation, so probably July or August sometime, so that we have kind of awareness of what's happening and how the TLC is trending. So if we need to build into more of those budget dollars to that, we won't be surprised, you know, asking for another $500,000 or $100,000, right?
Yeah, Your Worship, through to yourself and members of council, certainly, and that's what we did in 2021. And at that point, like I said, we had anticipated 145-ish thousand, which, all things considered, and being closed for 5 weeks, seemed to be, could have been caught up potentially if we had a great summer. And then things changed in the fall again unexpectedly. So we'd be more than happy to come back to all 3 municipalities at the midway mark of this year and provide an update.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that. Councilor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a further question for some clarity based on the conversation and the questions that were just asked. You spoke a little bit about the potential of deferring or holding off some of the capital projects for some period of time in order to help make up for the use of the capital reserve. I recall a situation with the Tri-Leisure being on the board for a while where we had, I believe it was repairs to the ice plant. And part of the logic behind getting them done when they were done was that had those repairs or had those replacements have been put off, the risk increased for the ice plant to actually go down. And when that ice plant went down and the lead time to get the parts and the pieces, etc., was significant, the risk to revenue loss by having that ice plant down was very significant. So when you talk about deferring some of the capital needs of the TLC that are upcoming, I do get a little bit worried about that because we are talking about a significant deficit right now. If all of a sudden, let's say, something with the pool were to go down and the pool was now closed for 2 to 3 months because the replacement of a piece of equipment was deferred, is that not a relatively high risk action to take to defer those capital replacement projects rather than being proactive in ensuring they are replaced prior to failure?
Your Worship, through to Councilor Laurie and rest of council, certainly they would be the items of lowest risk. We wouldn't be bringing forward a recommendation to push out, say, an essential piece of our operations that's long overdue. There's some components in there that would be not as essential, still required, but not as essential, that wouldn't impact our revenue. Because you're absolutely right. The last thing we need is for a piece of equipment to go down and all of a sudden an amenity is lost. One was previously mentioned there, handler unit that went down, I believe it was in 2012 or 2013, unexpectedly, and the pool was offline for a number of months. And so certainly if we were going to look to defer any pieces, it would be upon consultation with our experts in the field to determine that piece of equipment could last another year without any risk or, barring any unanticipated error situations. But yeah, it would be definitely the lower risk items, if any, that we'd look to defer.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for clarity and understanding, members of council? Okay, see none. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Richard and Mr. George. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for the time on your agenda. Have a good night.
Right, members of council, moving on with our agenda. Number 5 is statutory public hearings. We have nothing today. I move on to adoption of council minutes, 6.1. Councilor Loynes, please.
I move that the town council approve the regular council meeting minutes for February 14th, 2022 as presented.
Okay. Members of council, you had a chance to read them. Any errors or omissions? Okay. I do not see any either, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Councilor Hansard?
I vote yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, moving on to number 7, which is council boards and committees. Councilor Laurie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that town council receive the council boards and committee meeting minutes for information.
Okay. Members of council, you had a chance to read them. Any questions regarding those minutes from the boards? Hearing none. Councilor Meyer, I have a question regarding the Stony Plain Library minutes. There was a mention of withdrawing or not renewing the ALT membership. Can you provide some information on that, and what does the ALT provide for the Stony Plain Library?
It's a resource for the trustees, and there had been discussion the previous year, and we had elected at that time to renew the membership, and then judge moving forward its uptake by the trustees. At the meeting, we found that most people did not utilize that, and so with the increasing fee, we elected not to spend that money this year.
Thank you for that clarity. So, just for clarity, so that ALT is a resource for trustees so that there can be better board members, or just understanding how libraries work?
I believe it's a trustee improvement program kind of.
Thank you. Any other questions regarding those board and commission meeting minutes? See now, call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Hansard?
I vote yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Move on to number 8. There's no bylaws. And then we go to number 9, which is a business item. So right now we're just going to take a quick recess till for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. Thank you. To our meeting. Continuing on our agenda, we're moving on to the business items. There's quite a few, so we'll start with the first one, 9.1, the TLC operating deficit. Go ahead, General Manager.
Your Worship, members of council, being that we've just finished the presentation from the TLC, we don't have any further comments, just simply that we do recommend and support the recommendation of option 1 that the TLC has presented. As the General Manager of the TLC communicated, certainly the dollars overall at the TLC are municipal dollars, and really, if we were to fund, we would have to look into our own reserves and determine what the best funding avenue was for us, and it would certainly impact some of the decisions that we've made or would be making in our own infrastructure decisions as we continue to move forward with our own corporate planning.
Okay, thank you. Members of council, any further questions of clarity and understanding before I make the motion, ask for the motion? Councilor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm not sure how deep we're going to be able to go into the answer, seeing that we don't have either Ms. Valesky or, Ms. Stewart here for a financial question. I'm curious, obviously, we know at some point in the very near future we will see the annual surplus or deficit come forward for the town. And I'm curious if we have any indication of what that current position will look like.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie, I think at this point in time, administration would not be prepared to provide any specifics on that. And again, as the General Manager indicated, we're supportive of the recommendation that's been provided, and our corporate services and financial services team did review the report and the recommendation that was provided tonight, so they were privy to it in advance of the council meeting as well.
Anything else?
Jeez.
Okay, see there. Deputy Mayor, for the motion, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council approved the Tri-Leisure Center transfer of $113,147 from deferred revenue, $98,471 from the operating reserve, and $140,573 from the restricted capital reserve to fund the TransAlta Tri-Leisure Center 2021 operating deficit.
Okay, thank you for the motion. Members of council, it is on the floor. Questions, comments, and debate on the motion, please. Councilor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. While I can respect the fact that this has been reviewed and the proposed motion has been supported by administration, it does leave me with concern. We're talking about an operating deficit, and yet we're talking about using a capital reserve. As you mentioned, at any given point in time, if we deplete this capital reserve or even the potential operating reserves, that funding call will come back to the town. We know that in our budgeting processes and something that we will see in our coming weeks is the potential of the town's overall operating deficit or surplus. Without knowing what that's going to look like, it then becomes very difficult for us to actually determine what I would say the best course of action moving forward on this would be. Because if we do get a report that the town has a reasonable operating surplus from the last fiscal year, that would then give us an opportunity to fund our portion of this deficit without requiring an additional financial call from taxpayers and potentially without requiring the TransAlta Tri-Leisure Centre to utilize the restricted capital reserve, which would prevent a future higher ask for capital projects that need to be done at the Tri-Leisure. So I'm having a very difficult time with the idea of accepting this motion before we understand what the town's overall position will look like after the audited financial statements are presented and the annual operating surplus or deficit of the town of Stony Plain is known.
Okay. Thanks for the comments. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'll go back to a little bit of my question that I was asking at the beginning. When I look at this, I tend to think the same as Councilor Laurie, that there is some unanswered questions here that we really aren't seeing, and we're given a small option for it. My concern is, even though we're in an economic downturn and a lot of things like that at this point in time, we're going to use capital that is going to be needed, and we're going to have to replace this regardless, whether it's a short term or in the next 3 to 5 years. This is going to have to be replaced. So we're going to have to find the money somewhere. And I'm just wondering, what truly is our cost of this, dollar-wise, if we were to take today and take our share of this, and I'm going to say, doing rough math without doing it, we're probably $90,000 somewhere in that ask is what we're being asked for today. When we look at that in our spring adjustment, how does that look for our local resident today? When we add a small percentage to the tax increase today, what does that really look like today, opposed to in a year's time when we're asking for a substantial amount more, and we could have offset that a little bit in a smaller amount today?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Pletchko and also Councillor Laurie, because I believe the two questions are related. There's a couple ways to look at this. The TLC is coming forward with the principle of not impacting our already approved budgets. We're certainly going into our audit, and there may be a surplus. We may be even. We might have our own deficit. That has yet to be known. Certainly, Council does have an opportunity if they feel that the $90,000, give or take a few $1,000, is something that's very important to us to try and frame and maintain. Certainly, motions that typically are made in terms of where we and how we handle that surplus in the future, that could be part of Council's contemplation when we talk about the operational surplus in terms of dedicating that back for a specific use. At this time, the TLC is currently trying to complete their audit, and they're trying to ensure that they can close off the 2021 operational year, and this is one step that helps them achieve that outcome. So definitely we do have that opportunity. I don't think delaying this particular decision this evening furthers us or gets us any closer to what we're trying to achieve if we're going to use our own dollars to support that capital ask. At the end of the day, it's shuffling of dollars from one place to another place, but at the end of the day, it's municipal dollars collectively. And we certainly do have, and I think we can hear more from the financial group when they bring forward, the corporate services department, when they bring forward the surplus or the audit. Certainly you can bring this topic back up to them in terms of, is there an opportunity for, if you feel strongly about this, is this an opportunity for you to dedicate some of that surplus, if a surplus does exist, specifically for this purpose moving forward. There will be future capital asks. How big they are, that depends on their plan, that depends on how well they're maintaining equipment over at the TLC and their condition assessments that they complete, and that will determine how quickly they may be asking for capital dollars, or how often, or sorry, how long they can stretch that ask from the 3 municipalities. So I guess short answer, over the last 10 minutes, I think there's an opportunity to achieve that. Probably likely when we bring our own audit results forward, and Council could debate a motion at that point that might dedicate part of that specifically for what yourself and Councilor Laurie are, I guess, asking to potentially be done this evening. So,
okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councilor Hansard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really appreciate your question to the TLC admin members, and also Councilor Laurie's and Councilor Pletchko's concerns raised. I believe when the TLC was about 10 years old, there was a concern about repairs that were needed. And the TLC at that time had decided to use capital money, and it ended up causing rather than come to the municipalities and say, well, hey, we've got a problem here, it caused a very expensive, I think, new roof to have to be put on the facility. And I know that I would hate to see the day when money spent from capital reserves is spent for operational costs. I raised this issue at the TLC board meeting, but there you're sitting with members of other municipalities who are also watching out for their budgets. And I just want to say that I really appreciate this attitude that I see in my own council about protecting the capital issues so that that money is available. Here is a question that concerns me about this. This very same motion is going to all three councils for the other member owners as well. Can we actually basically alter how we want to see this funding request handled without having the similar motion passed also by the other two councils? Because I don't see how we can just break away and say, we'd rather fund this now from our budget, but we don't know what will happen with the other two councils. And so I'm wondering if that sort of breaks down, because we have three owners that have to agree to the same thing on how we're going to handle this. I hope that there will be a way for our admin, General Manager Hill, and us even as council, when the TLC comes back before us a little later this year, to talk about this matter rather than this business of borrowing from capital reserves to make up deficits. It does trouble me because I don't want to see those days return when suddenly we've got this massive repair and there's no money to cover it, and the TLC didn't want to bother the municipalities with an ask for extra money, perceiving that that might not be taken very well. It's our job as the owners to fund these things, and it's our job to make sure that the best decisions are being made by the TLC in managing the money so that we don't have a huge thing coming at us down the road, or any of the other owners for that matter. So my sincere appreciation to these members tonight. I'm just thinking that what good does it do us to say we don't want to handle it this way? We want to choose a different option that's not even on the table, but the other ownership members are not having the opportunity to have that same item. And I'd like to ask General Manager Hill, how does this affect their timing to be able to deal with their books if we now have to postpone a decision in order to get this looked at a little bit differently to come up with some other answers?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Hansard and the rest of the council, certainly the easiest route is to adopt the motion this evening and have further discussion around the town's allocation of surplus or other funds to support some of the concepts that have been discussed this evening. Councillor Hansard is correct. There are two other municipalities that have ownership stake in this particular deficit challenge. The two others are supporting the recommendation, and they may have conversation in their own chamber similar to this, and that has yet to be seen. But if we do alter the motion, then certainly it would defeat the approval process, and the TLC would have to come back, and we would have to have this conversation again at some point in the very near future. Councillor Paleschko, I did not answer one of your questions. It's about a 0.53 tax increase if we were to fund it through spring adjustments.
0.53.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hansard. Councillor Lori, you have another comment?
Your worship, and I just want to provide a little bit more clarity because it's 0.53 if we were to fund the entire shortfall. You had brought it up yourself. There are 3 different funding buckets that are considered in this ask. There is a deferred revenue, which is savings from past capital projects that money has not been then allocated to other projects. There is operating reserve, which is essentially monies that have already been provided to the TLC for operating that were able to be allocated to a reserve fund because their need for the municipal ask was not met or was overcompensated, sorry. And then there is the capital reserve. So as I go through these 3 items, 2 of them I have no problem with. I have absolutely no problem with using the operating reserve. That is what an operating reserve is for. I have no problem with using the deferred revenue. Although the deferred revenue was essentially created by savings in capital projects, that to me gives that money a little bit more leniency on where I would accept using that to. I would have loved to have seen it gone into the capital reserve for savings on future capital. However, again, that is savings on monies that we had already allocated and already committed. To use a capital reserve fund, though, to pay for an operating shortfall, to me is not in any best practices when it comes to budgeting. And when you look at that amount, Stony Plain's responsible amount for that is $35,143.25, which is approximately 0.2%, not 0.53. We also cannot make an appropriate informed decision until we understand the financial position of the town of Stony Plain at the end of the same fiscal year, which we do not know yet. We don't even have an indication from our manager of financial services or from our general manager of corporate services as to if they have a general indication at this time if we will end up in a surplus or end up in a deficit. Even if we had a general indication, that helps us meet the criteria for making this decision. And then, right, this decision has to be consistent within the 3 municipalities in order for it to pass. I guess the problem I have is I heard, well, the easy way to do it is to accept this motion. And is that what we should be doing? Should we be taking the easy way out? I propose a scenario. We accept this motion and we move forward with the premise that yes, if we do have a surplus, we will consider recontributing a portion of our surplus to the reserve. Well, to fair is fair, and to bring it back to proper, then all 3 municipalities would also have to agree on that. Can we speak for Spruce Grove? Can we speak for Parkland County? If we adopt this, approve this tonight, and choose to take that approach later, what if that doesn't pass unanimously through the 3 councils? Now we have depleted this, and even though our intention was to put that money back in, now we don't even have that opportunity. So I have a big challenge of moving this motion forward this morning, of voting in, or this evening, of voting in favor for this motion, knowing that it throws further uncertainty into what we do afterwards, into supporting what I would not feel is an appropriate allocation of funds when there are other methods. This is an operating shortfall, an operating deficit. To take from a capital reserve for that, I don't find appropriate.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Any other questions or comments from members of council? Okay, first of all, I want to just make very clear, we're the Town of Stony Plain Council, not the TLC Board of Directors. Okay, the TLC Board of Directors, there's 9 members of the Board of Directors, 6 members at large, 2 from each municipality and 1 elected official from each municipality. They had this conversation and they debated what the best way going forward was. right? We, as the Town of Stony Plain Council, are not the TLC board. We should not be debating that. The recommendation came from the board, from the general manager, in consultation with the 3 GMs, and then to our level. As mentioned here by members of council, you need all 3 councils to approve the same motion before it gets completed. Right? They need to have this done so that they can close their financial books. So our financial books are not tied to them. Their books are tied to us. Okay? I asked that question earlier because I had the same concerns, and it was answered by the general manager saying that the capital reserve is built up from operating reserve that the board has chosen to split up into different reserves. So that alleviated my concern and question about, was that just built in for operating, for capital? We can play back the video, and the answer was that was made from operating reserve surpluses, and it was earmarked by board of directors at that time. You know, council is concerned because we are coming out of a pandemic. We are in a kind of a lull in terms of economics, but it is turning around. Regardless if we fund this now or have the TLC use the reserves to do it, it's still our dollars. Do we hold it within our own municipality, or do we let TLC hold it? That's the question that we should ask. And if there is something that we want to do as a council later on, when the financial report comes back to the town of Stony Plain, we can decide to put a reserve in for the TLC so that when they ask for more money, we don't have to tax our taxpayers because it's already been done. Right? But to do it now at this point in time makes no sense. All 3 municipalities need to pass the same motion, and this is recommended by the board of directors of the TLC. It did not come forward from 1 or 2 or 3 municipalities. It came from the board of directors of the TLC. So my question was asked and answered because I did have the same concerns about the capital reserve, but when it was told and said that the capital reserve was created from surpluses in previous years allocated, so therefore it could have been all operating reserve if they wanted to. So I will be supporting the motion on the table. I think this gets us going forward, allows the TLC to close the books, and allows us as a council to debate what's best for the town of Stony Plain later on when we see it. And if we do see that we need to put more money away in our reserves for the TLC operating, then we can put that within our own reserves and not the TLC's reserves. Any other comments? Okay, with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Hansard?
I vote yes.
Okay. All those opposed? Okay. That's carried 6-1. Okay, move on to 9.2, which is the growth and commerce terms of reference. Who's in there? Councillor Hansard?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I do not see my council package with the screen set into council chambers. So I'm a little bit unclear how I read a motion. If you'll read the motion, I'll be glad to move it.
Councillor Hansard, can you not see the screen in front of you?
No, I cannot. I mean, I'm looking at you on my computer.
Okay.
So I'm happy to have you read the motion, and I'll be glad to move it.
Sure. Councillor Hansard, actually the screen says that the Town Council approved the updated Growth and Commerce Committee terms of reference.
Thank you for taking that so well. I wasn't sure how I was going to handle that if you called on me. I'd be happy to move that motion, sir.
Thank you. I was surprised that if the camera's pointed on me, you didn't shut off the feed already.
Oh, no. I like looking at you.
Administration, go ahead.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. This evening, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce a new member of our administrative team. Michelle Lavisser has been with us as our Economic Development Officer since November, and she's spent quite a bit of time over the last couple of months getting onboarded and acquainted with a number of our stakeholders in the business community, as well as our administrative team, and in particular our members of our Growth and Commerce Committee as well. So she's here this evening for her first presentation to Council for the Growth and Commerce Committee terms of reference. So I will just ask her to speak to this item. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager of Strategic Services. Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. Thank you for having me tonight. So I'm here to speak to the Growth and Commerce Committee Terms of Reference. This is terms of reference that's reviewed by the Growth and Commerce Committee annually. The committee has reviewed it and is recommending to Council updating 3 sections of the terms of reference. So the first section is with regards to the introduction, and this is just an update to reference the Economic Development Strategic Plan 2019 update. Previous to that, it was referencing the 2016 plan, but Economic Development and the Growth and Commerce Committee is working off of the 2019 updated plan. So this is why we are updating the introduction, and then we are also just updating some language that aligns closer to what it states in the 2019 update. The second section to be updated is the committee purpose, which again also is just aligning to reference the Economic Development Strategic Plan 2019 update, and then the themes identified within the action plans and guiding document there. And then the third one is just some grammar updates for consistency in the duties section 3.0. So just the additions of some semicolons. And that is it. So the recommendation to Council is just that you approve the updated Growth and Commerce Committee's terms of reference. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for those notes. Members of Council, it is in our agenda. It has been redlined and then updated as well. So any questions, comments regarding the proposed updates to the terms of reference? Councilor Hansard, any questions?
No, sir, I'm fine.
Okay. Call the question. All those in favor? Councilor Hansard?
I vote yes.
Okay, thank you, and that has been carried. Moving on to 9.3, which is the appointment of Assessment Review Board members. Councilor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Town Council appoint Gerald Amarin, Capital Region Assessment Services Commission, as Assessment Review Board Clerk for 2022, Raymond Ralph as Chair of the Assessment Review Board for 2022, and Darlene Chartrand, Tina Grosco, Stuart Henning, Richard Knowles, and Raymond Ralph as panelists to the 2022 Assessment Review Board.
Okay. Thank you very much. Administration, any comments? This is a yearly thing that we do as the Town of Stony Plain, as we're part of the Capital Region Assessment Services, and they provided an assessment for our community.
Thank you, Worship. And no further comments to that. That is correct, that it's an annual appointment as part of our bylaw for our assessment.
Okay. Any questions from members of Council? Councilor Hansard?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, you're asking if I have any questions?
Yes.
I do not.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. As I mentioned, this is a yearly appointment that we do as the Town of Stony Plain, and I noticed that this year there is one less panelist. Does the Capital Region Services have a minimum and a maximum number of panelists? And if so, what's the number? And if this is appropriate for having 5 members or panelists?
Your Worship, through to you and the rest of Council, there is no minimum or maximum currently, and my understanding is that this is just 1 member less than was appointed last year, so there isn't a drastic change in the membership at this point in time. So.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any questions, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Councilor Hansard?
I vote yes.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to 9.4. Councilor Meyer, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. We're bringing it up. There we go. The Town Council appoint Tim Kennedy to the Stony Plain Public Library Board.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody from administration want to provide some commentary?
Just that this was an appointment that was recommended by the library board, and it fills a vacancy as well. So thank you very much, Your Worship.
Okay. Thank you. The representative, any comments?
Sure. I got to sit on the what do you call it? The committee that looked into new board members, personnel committee. So I did have an opportunity to interview Tim. Strong, community-minded individual. Has unique skills that he'll bring to the board, and I think a unique perspective that maybe the board will benefit from. So I would and will support this.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments from members of council? See none, call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Hansard?
I vote yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. 9.5, go ahead, administration.
Your Worship, this is our fourth quarter 2021 annual report, or quarterly report from administration on operations, services, and programs and projects for your consideration, and just happy to open it up to any comments or questions from council at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you. And so members of council, again, the quarter report is in our agenda, and again, very well done, members of council. We definitely appreciate it. Easy for us to read and understand and get that snapshot of what happened in that previous quarter. Members of council, any questions for clarity? See none. Deputy Mayor, go ahead with the motion, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The Town Council accept the 2021 fourth quarter report for information.
Thank you. Members of council, questions, comments regarding the report? Debate on the motion? See none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Hansard?
I vote yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And administration, thank you much for the report, and I definitely appreciate seeing the feeds coming out through our social media about all the stuff that's happened over the last quarter. Again, lots of things happen within the year, and it goes by in a blink of an eye, so it's really good to see that recap every so often. So thank you. Hey, members of council, moving on to number 10 and 11, council information and council discussion. And this is the time that you can update members of council on certain things that have happened that might be coming. I'll start with Councillor Hansard, since you're on virtually. Anything to bring forward to council?
As part of our discussion, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
This is the part where we sometimes have fun.
Have fun, provide feedback, and highlight something that's happening in our community that you like to bring our attention to.
Yes, sir. And that's one of the things that I will do this evening. It's not about fun, but I appreciate the opportunity to bring before council and the public who would be viewing this evening that Canada, the U.S., and Ireland and the U.K. officially recognize a Black History Month. Stony Plain is a community that prides itself on inclusion and diversity. It is a time to honor this month, and here we are at the last day, but never too late. It is a time for us to honor the contribution and legacy of our Black brothers and sisters in our community, our region, our province, and indeed all of Canada. So I wanted to put before council, because as most of you know, Dan and I have a family of very diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds, and we are proud of every single one of our family members, several of whom have Black heritage from different countries. So thank you for the opportunity to put in front of us that we have an obligation, I believe, to acknowledge our Black history makers within our own community. And hopefully we'll see a day when we can move to more recognition of these individuals, just like we do our Indigenous peoples. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Nassar, for bringing that forward. And you're absolutely right. We definitely need to keep an eye on our history and the people that have built our communities. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to pick up where Councilor Hansard dropped off there, just to recognize an event that happened this weekend with our Multicultural Center and a partnership that they have with the Edmonton Short Film Festival. They had a community screening of short movies that were created by Black creatives, and the event brought some awareness to important issues of race, but also celebrated the talents of Black authors, actors, and creators in our community. And so a huge thank you to the staff there and their partnership in hosting that event this weekend. And lastly, just to mention the Coldest Night of the Year fundraiser in support of the Parkland Food Bank. I know there were several people within our town and the Tri-Region that participated in that. At last count, the goal of $80,000, I think we were just short about 78,000 and change. And so an amazing event raising support for the Parkland Food Bank in our community.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. Councilor Laurie.
Nothing this evening, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Loyens.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to bring attention to March 1st is Self-Injury Awareness Day, and there is actually an in-person and online event happening on tomorrow night from 6 to 8 p.m., and you can register online. It is to discuss understanding and supporting those who self-injure, as well as on March 2nd, it is the World Teen Mental Wellness Day, and that aims to normalize conversations and dismantle stigmas around teen mental health issues. And I just think it's really important to bring that up, seeing as we're now coming hopefully to the end of all the COVID regulations. And I think it's important to remember everybody has their own way of dealing with it. Some positive, some not so much.
Yes, thank you for highlighting those. As I'll say, mental health does matter, and it's okay not to be okay. We just need to have the ability to bring it out into the light and talk about it openly, as not as something that should be sheltered and hidden from the public. It is something that the more that we talk about it, the more we understand it, the more it is helpful for everyone that has the ability to come together and chat about it. So thank you. Councillor Meyer.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I guess I'll put it in terms of a question, or maybe a comment. In regards to our sign strategy, I was driving around in driving around town. South of the high school on Range Road 280, there is an old sign marking Stony Plain's original town site. Anyhow, there's it is one of the older signs, still of the old style, as well as there was a Canada flag and an Alberta flag that flies off it that have now, I'm not sure who put them there, but anyhow, they've now crumbled and it looks like it needs some attention. So that wasn't a question, that was a comment to administration.
Okay, that's a good comment. Maybe administration, is that one of our signs that we maintain and look after, or is that just a historical sign that was been put up for years?
Your Worship, to yourself and Councillor Meyer and all of Council, we can certainly have a look at that sign. I believe it is part of the town's sign inventory, so we can certainly have a look at the status of it and where it's at in terms of repair and upgrading as part of our signage strategy. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Meyer, for bringing that up, and I look forward to having that come back. I mean, it's one of the capital projects for next year. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Okay. And with that, just a few comments. Again, appreciated everyone that had donated money in support of my walk for the Coldest Night of the Year. As mentioned by Councillor Anderson, just shy of the $80,000 goal that was kind of put forward by the Parkland Food Bank. And all the dollars that were raised goes directly to the Parkland Food Bank to help residents in our tri-community. Again, As mentioned by our Premier, March 1st is also the opening of Step 2 of the COVID restrictions. So please check the Alberta website /COVID to figure out what Step 2 is, and that is happening on March 1st. And as well, March 4th, if everyone's available, there is a grand opening of a Stony Plain People's Pharmacy in Genesis on the Lakes. So if you're accepted, we'll see you there. And those that are watching would like to participate, definitely come down on March 4th to say hello and welcome to a new business to our community. Okay, with that, it comes to closed session. So again, closed session is the time that allows council to seek advice and hear things that could be harmful to the public at that immediate time. There are no motions made in closed session except for the motion to come out of closed session. Okay. Councilor Laurie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move the Town Council move into closed session to discuss per FOIP Section 25, 12.1, offer to purchase land.
Okay. Thank you. And just before we call the motion, once the motion is called, I'm going to take a 10-minute recess so that we can have the chambers cleared out of who's not supposed to be here and those that are supposed to be left. Then we can reconvene our meeting after the recess. We call the question. All in favor? Councillor Hansard?
I vote yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll take a 10-minute recess and then we'll go right into closed session. Thank you. Okay. Welcome back to the council meeting. There was one motion made in closed session, and that was made by Deputy Mayor Plechko, when the motion was to come out of closed session, and that was passed 7-0. Okay. Members of council, back to administration staff before, as part of our regulations, has anybody requested to be notified that council has come out of closed session?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, we've had nobody ask to be notified.
Okay, so then we don't have to wait 5 minutes, and we'll continue on with our agenda right now. Moving on to number 12, Deputy Mayor. No, sorry, not you. Councilor Meyer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, that council authorize administration to finalize and execute a real estate contract for the transfer of up to 2 acres of southeast quarter 1-53-28-W4M to 2209-019 Alberta Limited in response to an offer to purchase and in accordance with the disposal of land under the Municipal Government Act, and to direct proceeds from the disposal of land to the general purpose reserve as per land management policy C-CAO-036.
Okay. Thank you, Councilor Meyer. For members of council, we've had a presentation from administration. Any comments and questions regarding the motion on the floor? Okay. Seeing none and hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Councilor Hansard?
I vote yes.
Okay. Thank you, and that's passed 7-0. Okay, with that, members of council, that comes to number 13, which is our adjournment. We'll definitely have a great week. And again, there's a lot of things that are mentioned during council information items and council discussion regarding mental health this week. So please take a little more time to be aware of that, and always take the opportunity to be kind. It doesn't take very much effort to be kind, but it does make a world of difference to somebody else's day. With that, we're adjourned.